Welcome to the Friday edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 154, and it's the dynamic duo back in action, wearing black, talking about all things Anglican. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today's January 23rd, 2015.
Welcome to the Friday health edition of Anglican Unscripted, where George and Kevin talk about their growing old parents. How are your mom and dad doing, George?
Oh, they're crazy as loons. My mother checked herself out early from a nursing home. But hey, my wife and I are crazy too, so I think it's just natural for us. She came home yesterday and she wants to drive her car, even though she's half blind with her cataracts and has trouble getting in and out of the car because of her heart condition. She can still get behind the wheel and drive. So people of Florida, beware.
Well, Grandpa Carlson had an incident as well. He had a wonderful meal with Grandma and cleaning up the dishes. Grandma goes into the living room, sits down, and Grandpa sees two little candies on the counter wrapped up in a little white foil. And he opens it up, pops it in his mouth, and grabs one and goes to give it to Grandma. And Grandma says, "What are you doing? That's Cascade." So Grandpa ended up in the hospital getting his mouth and throat washed out, and he's healing just fine.
Tide,
I don't know. I'll tell you what. When a Carlson man sees candy, it's all over. So, so keep my dad in your prayers, and keep Miss Conger in your prayers, and.
Kevin, we can get group rates somewhere for.
Just like it's like his third time to the hospital this year too, or within the year. It is what it is.
Obamacare for paying for this.
Cascade, what were you thinking? So, on to the news. We're going to do some quick Pope news and some quick Anglican news. I have to be on a flight in a couple hours. I'm off to Western Anglicans to film the consecration of the new bishop there. It'll be live streamed Sunday night on Anglican TV.
And I'm headed off to Orlando for the Diocese of Central Florida Convention this afternoon.
I'll have more fun. So, let's talk news. I was watching first of all, somebody gave a microphone to Pope Francis on an airplane. And if there's anything we've learned in the last year and a half, that's not the place to give the Pope a microphone. He was up and he was talking about rabbit season and how that the Catholic Church should stop doing rabbit season. And what I mean by that, he was talking about contraception, and he says, listen, we have this reputation for having large families and stuff like that. And it started to go downhill from there, George.
Well, Pope Francis is unlike Pope Benedict. Benedict kept things on the same intellectual plane. In other words, he would always know he was being serious. Francis switches between high theology and common tongues. And Francis basically said Catholics have a reputation for breeding like rabbits, which is something my grandmother might have said at one time in not so polite company. But what Francis was doing, he was defending the Catholic Church's teaching on contraception, saying that family planning should take place and we have a parental and family responsibilities, and he's referring to Gaudium et Spes, and then he goes into this thing, well, we shouldn't be seen like we're breeding like rabbits. And of course, the press misses all the references to Catholic encyclicals and Catholic teaching and just focuses on Catholics breed like rabbits. This morning, the Telegraph in London has an article, German Rabbit Breeders Association angry with Pope over slur against rabbits. I mean, at a certain point, they say all publicity is good publicity, but at a certain point, I think it's not true. I mean, when you've got the rabbit breeders of Germany against you, man, you've lost Europe.
It did occur to me that Pope Francis and my father are the same age, so I can see that there's some types of issues that maybe beyond my understanding going on. Let's move on to talk about Anglican news. Lots been happening in the world as far as no news. nothing's really been happening. There's not a really lot of Episcopal news. It's going to be slow until they have their general convention. There's not been a lot of international news. There's no GAFCON coming up. The call for an EMEA,
AMIE.
yes, AIM, whatever. And England is taking a slow course. It's not the fast course that Acton took. So the world has been kind of quiet lately. And we saw a report that some Africans were over here having tea with tech and forgiving tech for all their ills and saying how wonderful tech is. And it kind of went unfeathered for a while until this week, George.
Yes, in October, 5 African primates met at General Theological Seminary as part of this ongoing process, sort of like the Indaba conversation, where why can't it's the Rodney King version of Anglicanism? Why can't we all get along? And a bunch of Episcopal bishops and Canadian bishops and these five primates got together and they produced a communique on friendship that we celebrate our diversity, the usual pep. And the 5 signers from Africa were the archbishops of Burundi, Central Africa, West Africa, Tanzania, and South Africa. Now, I'll just pause right there. 3 of those provinces have flipped.
Yes.
Meaning their leaders had firmly been in the GAFCON camp, but when there was a change of leadership, they went to the liberal camp. Bernard Malongo was at the Pittsburgh conference years ago of Malawi. He was a stalwart on the conservative side. When he retired, he was replaced by a bishop from Zambia. And that bishop sort of swings both ways. A lot of money from the English liberal mission organization, the U.S., used to be called the USPG, flows into Zambia. And the Zambian church doesn't ordain women, is very in its internal policies is very conservative, but will say and do whatever it takes to keep the spigot flowing. Mm-hmm. West Africa, Justice Akrofi, one of the GAFCON founding primates, he was replaced by Daniel Sarfo, Bishop of Kumasi in Ghana. Sarfo has got friends in England, and he basically likes to play the Canterbury game. And Jacob Chimiladaya of Tanzania. We reported extensively on that corrupt election, how U.S. money bought the election. Money changed hand, dioceses flipped their votes. Some dioceses complained they weren't paid enough. And Chimiladaya, since his election, has towed the U.S. line. South Africa has always been liberal, by the way. And Burundi, Bernard Natatore, has always sort of played both sides. Well, if they sign this communique, and in November, Eliud Wabukula puts out his Advent letters, and he doesn't name names, but he warns Africans against trading their faith for U.S. dollars. Mm-hmm. And then we hear nothing. And so, Kevin, as you say, we had no news, so we called our friends in Nairobi and said, guys, can you hand us something?
That's right.
Here's what we reported last night. That the GAFCON primates from Africa released a letter that was so unprecedented in its severity.
I think we call it scathing. Scathing. Yes, yeah.
Against Archbishop Bernard Natatore of Burundi. Mm-hmm. And what they said to Archbishop Bernard was, who are you to sign off on a document as chairman of CAPA saying this is approved by African Anglicans when we, who make up 3/4 of African Anglicans, are absolutely opposed to it? So you, Archbishop Bernard, must either apologize and repent or step down as chairman of CAPA. And if you don't do these things, CAPA, the Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa, it's over. We're done. We're out.
Well, it is interesting because I think as far as tech was concerned, there was not going to be any outrage of this sort coming from GAFCON. You and I didn't think GAFCON would go this far to sit down and put a well-principled letter together, calling this a full peace. We know, Mr. Burundi, you don't believe these things. What are you doing?
Yes, one of the things I said in the letter is, we know, Bernard, we know your heart. We've spoken to you. We know you as a person. We know that you don't believe these things, but you appear to have sold your soul for the American dollar. Now, I was flabbergasted to read this because that's not the African way of doing things. It may be the Nigerian way of doing things, but certainly in other parts of Africa, they work on consensus. They don't like to sort of make their problems public. And one of the things that they said in this letter, which we've posted on Anglican Ink., is that since we wrote to you in December, you've not responded. And so we're making this letter public so as to clear the air so people know where we stand, so they don't think that our silence means assent. As I said, this is an extraordinary public dressing down of a fellow African archbishop. And I think we need to understand the culture in which this is released. This is not, one American bishop calling another American bishop a heretic or a bad person. This is, if you will, almost a family dispute that's gone public. And, in Africa, they keep things close to the chest. And when they go public, man, it's 10 times worse than it would be in the U.S.
Well, I think this is something that the Archbishop of Canterbury has to pay attention to. He's always been, he just traveled the world. And you and I have talked extensively about this in the past, where he seems to be promoting a false peace. A full peace, and where he's going around saying we can all work together as a family. We're a family unit. Sure, crazy Uncle Bob Tech is part of us, but we can't leave them out of this thing we call the Anglican Communion. And we're saying, well, that's kind of a false peace because we're not here to embrace heresy. We're not here to embrace a family member who doesn't want to be with us. In this case, a spiritually violent family member who's hurting other members of the family. And I think the Archbishop of Canterbury needs to look and read this GAFCON letter for what it is. It's calling into account those who are stepping outside almost the bonds of faith here, George.
Yeah, Kevin, I think he should read it, but what does it matter if he does? We've reached the point, I think, of no return. Mm-hmm. The unraveling of the fabric of the Anglican Communion that Drexel Gomez prophesied in 2003 over the consecration of Gene Robinson has now reached the point that Africa is divided amongst itself. How do you think you're going to have a primates meeting called, or a Lambeth conference, when the Africans cannot even now hold an internal meeting because they are divided over the Episcopal Church of the USA and the after effects of the Gene Robinson consecration? Now, in some respects, this document is a victory for the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church has been trying to form its own communion, the Episcopal communion of like-minded churches like Brazil and maybe Wales, sort of the peripheral churches that either are liberal or need the money that comes from New York. Now, the African Anglicans either have to choose sides because they can't keep quiet anymore because it's not come out in the open. And those who need the money and those who truly believe in the American way of doing things now have a home with the Episcopal Communion. They certainly don't have one with the GAFCON folks.
No. So keep GAFCON in your prayers. Keep the Anglican Communion, as fractured and broken as it is, in your prayers, and keep your leaders in your prayers. George and I have to cut short today, and I'm off to the airport. And gotta go. So George, you have a good week. I'll catch you on Monday or Tuesday, and I'll catch you guys out there in Anglican land soon. God bless. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 154 of Anglican Unscripted. Susan, would you tell the birds to be quiet?
Well, you're so close to Disney. Birds are cartoon characters with love and joy, and they follow Snow White all over.
All the birds outside are making noise. Well, they're still making noise. Put the cats outside. It's Jason.
Right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Friday edition.
Susie.
We're recording, Susie.
You and the cats and the dogs. And get everybody in one room and shut the door. Kitty was eating very loudly in back of me, too. So chewing your cat food.
This should encourage you to get set up in the office.
Susie, I will, but I can't get them to dig a trench any faster unless I join them with a
Except
shovel.
I'll miss Kevin.
You can always talk. Susan?
I'm taking them.
Okay.
You want me to go outside and chase
No, I
birds?
don't want you to go outside and chase birds.
Just
But the sun is rising and I'm
Yeah.
getting shadows.
And we have to be done in a half an hour. So just in case. 3, 2, 1.